So I'm going to do several videos on what we may call the God of the Technocrats or the God of Technocracy. This is from Steiner's ideas regarding Ahriman. Ahriman is that being which is the Lord of Chaos, if you will. He is the opponent of Ahura Mazda, or Ormazd, the creator, the Lord of Wisdom. Ahriman, obviously an abbreviation of Angra Mainyu, literally just means destructive spirit. Angra is actually where we derive our word for angry from, right? That sort of destructive or disorderly spirit. So to begin, and again I'm taking this from a blog by Michael Martin. This was posted on July 26, 2021, and I found it very interesting, actually, and even the title, of course, piqued my interest. But we're going to go through this. I don't agree with everything that he states, but most of what he states is merely quotes from Steiner and the Christian philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev. And just pay attention to the quotes. It's very interesting. I mean, what we're reading here was written, well, respectively about 110 years ago, right? Both books of Berdyaev that we will cover, and of course Steiner. So to begin, in the Zoroastrian mythos, Ahriman or Angra Mainyu is the spiritual power who opposes Ahura Mazda, or Ormazd, the creator, whose name means Lord of Wisdom. In his early novel Cosmic Puppets, Philip K. Dick uses the Ahura Mazda Ahriman binary in the story of the battle between spiritual and cosmic evil and good played out in small town Virginia. It was kind of a precursor to Dick's later fascination with Gnostic dualism, and in no small part influenced his thoughts on what we would now call mass surveillance and transhumanism. This is another reason why we see the likes of the Internet of All Things, and Harari speak about this, firstly in sort of religious connotations and religious terminology. For example, he calls the Internet of All Things the new God, or that dataism, the faith of, that is under and reveres and worships this Internet of All Things, the new God, is itself a new theology. It's a new religion. It is to mass convert all of mankind, and of course to merge and inventorize the entire world into this biodigital panopticon-like system. Again, as we will get into within this article, and Michael Martin, the author of this article, has also made the same connection, that it is like the Borg in Star Trek: The Next Generation. And there's psychological reasons for that. I'm going to tease that in the next video, tease out some of those reasons. The psychology of the technocrat, the reasoning of the technocrat, and of course the reason, or the raison d'etre, and the reason that the technocrat came into existence. Again, from a purely psychological perspective, and touching upon Jungian psychology, a very occult or esoteric form of psychology. But we must make note of as well this idea that they seek to phase out all unpredictable elements within the world. The first and foremost unpredictable element is the human mind. Thus, this is why we see the likes of the smart dust, graphene oxide, carbon nanotubes, the nanopatch. I did a two-part series on that some years back now. I think it was January 2022, right? That's them now sort of beginning to discuss that, the nanopatch, and utilising that for administering of needlecraft. This is a sort of needless needlecraft. But it is a digital transubstantiation. That is what, no pun intended, many individuals have substantiated regarding it. For example, I believe her name is Samantha Wallace. She's discussed that at length. And there's this other notion as well that with the towers that were being erected during the mass global house arrests and that entire scenario beginning on the 3rd of March 2020, that the towers that were being erected were not to serve the purpose of a telecommunication network in the traditional sense, but was to serve the purpose of a biodigital telecommunicative network, a system of control, a nascent system that was emerging, that they were building gradually the infrastructure for in the midst of this tumult of crises. And by this, they sought the final phase of the managerialist revolution, or the technocratic transitionary paradigm, and that is to reformulate mankind into a totally biodigital entity. Hence, they could, as the cyberneticists sought, to totally control them, to ensure that they can create a homeostatic or autopoietic system. Essentially, that's a self-organising and self-assembling and self-perpetuating system. A negative feedback loop, right? And the negative part of that feedback loop is, for example, let us think about this. I did have an illustration regarding this several years back, but unfortunately I can't find it. If I can find it, I'll put it in the video here. But to think about it, to visualize it, think of a circular system. We begin with a thought, right? The thought is processed, or the emotion rather, not necessarily the thought. The thought is too complex, but the emotion, the biological response is processed, it's translated into electrical signals, right? That then passes into the artificial sense organ that is implanted within individuals. This can be a nano sense organ, right? Or some sort of implantable device, right? The nano sense organ would obviously have to go through and into the bloodstream. I would have to infiltrate the body, at least to the nerves, so at least, subdermally. That is then, through radio frequency, essentially Bluetooth, it is relayed to towers, right? The towers then process that, or pass it on to a processing unit, a data center, where that data center, using AI algorithm, and eventually when AGI, or artificial general intelligence, that is the more evolved sense of AI, that has its own capabilities of, as I've mentioned in previous videos, structural generalization. Essentially, it has higher hippocampal function. It can take its knowledge base and begin to reformulate that in a rather abstract way. And through this abstract method or process or way, it can begin to create what are discernible or perceivable, new or novel ideas. However, it will go to that data center. That data center then, in a split second, will pass back to the tower, right? So this is going right round again, right? We're going back on ourselves. This is the circularity of the system, the reciprocity of it. It goes back to the tower, that signal, that updated signal. That signal will provide instructions either to do nothing, right? Because the biological system, the human, the economic units, the human resource, is acting optimally, right? It's not acting divergently from the paradigm that has been set. Or it sends instructions, and we already have patents regarding the nanopatch. Again, view my videos on my alternative channels on BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, where I go into this, where the patents can actually, based on RF signals that are transferred wirelessly to the artificial sense organ, or in this case the nanopatch, it can induce electrical or electromagnetic biological stimulation, right, within the system, within the target. This is exactly what the tower will send through RF to the human subject. This will then correct the emotional behaviour, or simply discombobulate, or to quantize. By that I mean to take out all of the dynamic edges, to sort of suppress in that manner the human system, the biological target, right, who has the artificial sense organ implanted in them. That system, again, maintains itself eternally, right, until obviously the biological system dies. Or, of course, until the informational system ceases to exist. That is a system, again, the negative part of it is the negation of entropy. It is a system of negentropy, right? A system that seeks to be beyond decay. Now, of course, that is not going to last. It is totally fanciful. It's based on a foundation of hubris. It is never going to succeed. You need entropy, right? That, of course, is the negative principle of the negative feedback loop of existence, right? If you're to do away with entropy or decay, or, you know, the tendency for biological systems or merely systems of matter to break down, to lose cohesion in and of themselves through time, through the progression of time, that is something you cannot get rid of. If you were to get rid of that, existence itself would cease, right? It'd become a positive feedback loop. It'd be a feedback loop which, you know, had loss throughout its reciprocal process. So it's similar to Sauron, this idea of even the Lord of the Rings, the one ring to rule them all, right? It seeks circularity. It seeks, because the circle is the heavenly symbol, it seeks to recreate that here on Earth, right? That's another reason, by the way, that Yahweh, or Yaldabaoth, is clearly the demiurge. He is the Ahriman, if you will, the god of time, the god of the technocrats. He, apart from all of his various promises that he provides to the technocratic tribe, besides all of that, what we have is him stating that his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's contained, of course, in the Lord's Prayer. That is exactly what the individuals who sought the Tower of Babel were attempting to do, right? They were wanting to reach heaven, to unify heaven and earth under the artificial technological paradigm brought about by the hubris of man, who was possessed, again in a very sort of psycho-spiritual sense, by the spirit of Yaldabaoth, by the spirit of Ahriman, by the spirit of Yahweh. And I think what we read in the Old Testament is totally subverted. And I'll actually get into this. There's several notes I have on the Tower of Babel, in that the individuals who built that tower, the individuals who sought the centralization of all thinking, right? Again, remember, in those days everyone had one language, or other translations are, they were of one mind, right? It's the internet of all things. It's exactly that. You even see, code. Where does that come from? That word, code, right? Well, it's very similar to the Hebraic term, Kodesh, right? Ruach HaKodesh, right? The breath, the holy breath, the Holy Spirit. That's what Kodesh means, that which is holy, right? That is what they are writing into these AI algorithms, seeking to establish artificial intelligence, right? Seeking to establish a new God upon earth, to digitize Yaldabaoth, to bring him into the physical world through the intermediate technology of digitalism. It's very similar to Roko's basilisk, that this entity, this spirit, this very dweller of the abyss of our psyche, he who seeks to cultivate and inflame the shadows of the psyche, and of course to mechanize man. That's another thing with Ahriman that we're going to read, that he possesses man, that he possessed a chosen group. And this chosen group that we read, for example, in the Book of Enoch as well, Shemiyaza, that he fell from heaven to earth, right? And he, from there, created the first secret society, essentially. That they all took blood oaths, that under the pain of imprecation, the cursing of their soul, they would be bound. I think there was around 300 of them. They'd be bound to this plan for world government, this plan to overthrow Ahura Mazda, or Ormazd, the monad, the source, the true God, right? Of course, I was discussing this idea, similar, I mean, it's a synonymous idea within John Milton's Paradise Lost with Armun Rai. This idea that what we're seeing in Ahriman is actually perhaps a rejected aspect of the source, of the monad. You read the Old Testament and tell me with a straight face that is a deity of serenity, peace, order. He perhaps seeks that, but he doesn't have it already. Therefore, he utilizes humans, almost possesses them, deceives them, uses guile and cunning to bring them and the entire species as a whole to the destination that he seeks, which is his form of order, right? Which is, of course, built around chaos, totally around chaos. This is similar to Sauron in Lord of the Rings, totally similar. It's the same sort of entity. It's that same psychic shadow that lurks within the recesses of the mind and the spirit of man, that we are constantly fighting against. We are fighting against the nihilistic, atheistical tendency, the misanthropy, the undervaluing of our fellow man, the undervaluing of our own gifts of thinking, of sentience. Individuals now seek to outsource all of that. It is fighting against chaos. To think of it in a very, very simplistic manner. We're in a world now that doesn't seek to fight against chaos. The very legislative bodies, the executive and judicial branches, are all predisposed towards a type of anarcho-tyranny, that what we live in has the guise of order, but at its heart, the way that it administers its kingdom is through the sinews of chaos. It is through the inducement of chaos. They induce it. They are terrorists. They are terroristic regimes. They utilize terror in its very primordial and base essence. to get what they want. And what do they want? Well, we know what they want. They want a world unto themselves. They want a world that is completely binary, that is within a panopticon-like prison, that is constantly surveilled, that this idea of belonging, of community, of family is executed upon the gallows of modernity. So this is really wrapped up in everything that we're seeing right now. Even what we saw during 2020, right? The Latin corona means crown. That other word, attached to the corona that starts with V means poison, right? The poisoning of the crown. That's exactly what 2020 was about. It also was linked with Saturn as well. Saturn is another emanation, another similar psychic force to this. Again, you could say it's synonymous. It's merely the Roman or Latin term for what the Greeks would call Kronos, what the Zoroastrians called Angramanyu or Ahriman, what the Romans and the Greeks as well called Aeon, another term. And of course, in the East, in the Middle East, in the Levant, in the Arabian Peninsula, this deity was worshipped. It was worshipped. The power was worshipped. Right, the power that it's promised. All of that was revered. So in those areas, right, the supposed Holy Land, where lies a barren desert of death and desolation, a dead sea by which, if one merely gulps too much of its waters, because of the high bromide content, they will die a slow and agonizing death. This is not the Holy Land, unless, of course, you worship the seed of chaos, the child of chaos, the Yaldabaoth. This world is very different to what we are led to believe. This world is inverse, it's topsy-turvy, it's designed to be so. And its designer is he who is the seed of chaos, as I have mentioned. He is the fomenter of division, discord, and disorder. He says one thing, he does another. It's a system of platitudes, euphemisms, dysphonisms. Everything about it is based on illusion, the alteration of the prime frequency, the modulating of it by chaos, by the forces of chaos. Now, of course, for existence's sake, these forces of chaos are necessary. But we are in a state now where the imbalance is clearly visible. So this is the reason, ultimately, for everything that we see regarding the scientistic and technocratic, techno-tyrannical delusion that we see taking the fore as the spirit of this age. So I went on quite a tangent there just to get back to this article. The concept of Ahriman also appears in the writing of the great Russian radical Christian philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev, and became a fundamental idea in the spiritual science of Rudolf Steiner. For both Berdyaev and Steiner, Ahriman represents the technological, the materialistic, and the technocratic, that which seeks always to turn human beings into collectivist and efficient machines, emotionless, unfeeling, and inartistic, like the Borg in Star Trek, The Next Generation. In the introduction to the meaning of the Creative Act, 1914, Berdyaev confesses himself a dualist with some serious qualifications. Quote, "I confess an almost Manichaean dualism. So be it. The world is evil, it is without God and not created by him. We must go out of the world, overcome it completely." This is exactly what Christ stated. "The world must be consumed, it is of the nature of Ahriman. Freedom from the world is the pathos of this book. There is an objective source of all evil, against which we must wage a heroic war. The necessity of the given world and the given world itself are of Ahriman," unquote. And then the qualifications. Quote, "Over against this stands freedom in the spirit, life in divine love, life in the pleroma. And I also confess an almost pantheistic monoism. The world is divine in its very nature. Man is by his nature divine. The world process is self-revelation of divinity. It is taking place within divinity. God is immanent in the world and in man. The world and man are immanent in God. Everything which happens with man happens with God. There is no dualism of divine and extra-divine nature, of God's absolute transcendence of the world and of man," unquote. He is completely aware of the antimony and embraces it. In The Meaning of History, 1923, Berdyaev returns to the Zoroastrian understanding of Ahriman in his consideration of history and what is always a preoccupation of his eschatology. Quote, "The conflict between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman is resolved by a catastrophe which brings about the end of history and the beginning of something else." This is, again, the evolution of history, the evolution of these various eras of civilization and grand cultural epochs, right? This is what I call rotational human farming. Eventually, you run out of topsoil, right? Of course, due to over-farming and due to economies of scale within agriculture, right? We're seeing that today, actually, in a lot of farms in the UK. The topsoil is just being run off, drained, right? And of course, there's a mismanagement of the agriculture. So therefore, there is no reforms, nothing is being done, and the topsoil is simply dissipating at an ever-accelerating rate. I think some commentators, again, this is just from memory, from pure recall, I could be incorrect here, but some commentators on the state of agriculture in the UK have stated that a lot of the fields, again, due to the drainage of topsoil, you may have another 9 harvests, of good, proper soil. Before after that, the situation becomes rather untenable and irreparable, right? And by irreparable, I mean civilization. If importation stops of food, civilization would cease overnight, and it'd be quite some time before the soil regained its state, right? Its good, arable state. So to tie that in with human rotational farming, in terms of, for example, the establishment or the quote-unquote elite viewing humans as a crop, a resource, human capital and such, then human rotational farming, if you're to get rid of the topsoil, essentially what you're doing is you have exploited all of the generations, all of the good generations of the pioneering ancestors of that civilization. They have been exploited, the land has been exploited of its natural resources, and thus you have to liquidate the civilization at that point, the business, because you have no more topsoil, or you've lost the virile element of the population and, of course, the natural resources. So, continuing on, the eschaton, I think, it's spiritually healthy to say, is always already happening, It's only that sometimes it is easier to perceive. My guess is that Berdyaev first became intrigued by the religious and sociological implications of the concept of Ahriman during the period of his interest in Rudolf Steiner. Berdyaev's friend, the poet and novelist Andrei Bely, real name Boris Bukharev, was an early Russian enthusiast of Steiner's and encouraged his friend to read some of the Austrian philosopher's work, and even entreated him to attend lectures of Steiner's in Helsingfors, Finland in 1913. Berdyaev was never completely sold on Steiner, but neither did he completely dismiss him. He returns to Steiner often in his work, sometimes in approval and sometimes in critique, but he takes him seriously. Steiner's treatment of Ahriman is much more developed and complex than Berdyaev's. Clearly inspired by Hegelian dialectic, Steiner reads Ahriman as part of a polarity, with Christ as the mediator. Quote, "To gain a right conception of the historical evolution of mankind over approximately 6,000 years, this is the same idea as the 7th millennia, and of course, the followers, the chosen followers of the Technocratic God, of which about over 50% now, I believe, of the world population follow in some capacity, either it be in a sort of lukewarm or tepid capacity, or even in a full-blown, fundamentalist, conflagrative, evangelical capacity. Whatever it may be, they follow him, right, at least culturally. One must grasp that at the one pole stands an incarnation of Lucifer, in the centre the incarnation of Christ, and at the other pole the incarnation of Ahriman. And I just want to state as well, you will want to read my book, Yahweh is Satan, The Genesis of a New Order of the Ages. I lay all of this out, right? I've also done videos as well on the Grand Zodiacal cycle, and furthermore I included, I believe, within the Grand Zodiacal cycle and the Yovel cycle, I included the 7 millennia idea. So in each period of human history, you have, because it's 7 times 7, 49 years, that is the Yovel cycle. And it's also, of course, the Grand Zodiacal cycle, the cycle of Sirius B around Sirius A. And again, when you view that in a long-term projection, it creates a double arc operation, right? And by what I mean by that is, or a double arc trajectory. By that, what we mean is it creates, a sine and cosine wave. This creates a figure of 8 style wave, a sine wave with its mirror, right? Again, as above, so below. It's those notions, those downstream cosmic principles, these maxims of the cosmos. So all of that is tied up with that Grand Zodiacal cycle, but there is 120 of these 49.9. That is the actual figure, 49.9 year intervals. But within the 6,000 years of these epochs of human history, there are 120.24 49.9 year intervals. Now, of course, 120, take away that 0, and you get, of course, the Zodiacal wheel, right? Furthermore as well, I mean, the 24, the point 24 is double 12. So you're seeing all of these various numbers that are tied into this. There's an architecture to this. That's what it shows. The reason we can pick up on this, the reason that even our own bodies as well are constructed via a ratio, a mathematical ratio, really shows that there is an architecture to the cosmos. Is it intelligent? It seems so. Is it intentional? I think that's the more important question. Is it intentional? We don't really care if it's intelligent, but is it intentional? I believe it is. All of it is intentional. Why? What is the reason for this intent? That's the question. My answer would be, and I think the fairly optimal explanation, is it's this cosmic battle between the light and its shadow. Because remember, shadows are only cast via the obfuscation of light around a form. It's the light that casts the shadow. The light must be there for the shadow of the form to be cast. What we're really discussing here is this cosmic battle that has been raging since the formation of the cosmos. In fact, this battle is what maintains the cosmos in its existential state. And very briefly before we get back to the quote, this Ahrimanic and of course Luciferian, both of them, one is the tyrant Ahriman and the other, on its other polarity, on the other extreme of the polarity, is the rebel, that is Lucifer. The rebel and the tyrant are exactly the same, right? It's like that Who song, right? The new boss, same as the old boss. Once the rebel, if successful, overthrows the tyrant, then he inevitably becomes a tyrant himself, because rebels typically have lofty ideals, which is exactly what Lucifer had before he fell from heaven. He sought to impose what he saw as order. He sought power, the power of God, and he was cast down from heaven to earth, where he became a tyrant upon this realm, because he could not become a tyrant in heaven. This is exactly what we're seeing going on right now. Everything you see, the materialism, the technological need for control, the very pursuit of what really is self-extinction of the human spirit. This is all Ahrimanic. This is the shadow, the mutated shadow form of Lucifer, the light bearer. Because remember, light will always cast a shadow if it is obfuscated, if its path is obfuscated by an obstacle. What was that obstacle for Lucifer? God. So therefore the shadow that was cast by Lucifer around that obstacle of obfuscation of the light, of his glory, of his ideals, of his ideological, idealistic view of how he wanted existence and heaven to be, was cast as Ahriman. It was cast as the shadow of Ahriman. It was the rejection of the truth that his pride was but a lie. That nature, that titanic nature, that titanic duality between the light and the dark is contained within man. The only way back and out of this place is through the middle process of temperance. That is the Christ, or the Krishna, or whatever term we want to attach, or whatever epithet rather we want to attach to the Saviour figure. Galatians 3:26. With your faith in Jesus Christ, you are all sons of God. The faith isn't materialistic. It's not saying a prayer at night. It's not going to church and tithing. Those are all Ahrimanic conceptions of the materialist world. God is immanent within oneself. It should, if you awaken that immanence within oneself, it should impel you to gain a union with the divine once more, to find the divine spark within you and to rekindle it via the lessons you have learned from this world of suffering, of darkness, of greed, of the mercurial schizophrenic nature born of the sin of Lucifer and the shadow which that cast, which was Ahriman. So continuing on with the quote, one must grasp that at one pole stands an incarnation of Lucifer, in the centre the incarnation of Christ, as I've just mentioned, and at the other pole the incarnation of Ahriman, the tyrant. Lucifer is the power that stirs up all fanatical, all falsely mystical forces in human beings. All that physiologically tends to bring the blood into disorder, and so lift man above and outside himself. Again, the rebel, right? This is the rebel. Ahriman is the power that makes people dry, prosaic, Philistine, that ossifies them and brings them into the superstition of materialism. Again, all religions are Ahrimanic in that sense, because all of these superstitions are materialistic. Name one superstition that is not materialistic. I'll wait. I can name a few, for example, through history that show that all superstitions are materialistic. All religious dogmas are materialistic, right? This idea of the literal everlasting life that Christ provides in a materialist sense. That's why people follow him. These people are not spiritual, the majority that believe they're going to literally have everlasting life. Why would you want to have everlasting life if you were a spiritual being? The materialistic world is a world of avarice and vice. It is something that, as Christ stated, it's something you're within, but you should not be of. Yet these individuals want to possess materialistic abundance for all eternity, not understanding the greater subtext behind, or the greater metaphorical subtexts behind that everlasting life promise, for example. We see as well the witch hunting craze, the Malleus Maleficarum and what have you, which of course the Catholic Church opposed in the beginning, but eventually succumbed to the mob. That superstition was born of materialism. They literally thought that witches were dancing with Satan, or that they were actually engaged in the osculum infami, the shameful kiss, which I'm not going to mention what it was, but it's this sort of sickness that drives superstitions. It's what leads us to the bestial, again prosaic and Philistine impulse that ossifies us all, that ossifies all potential growth in humanity. That ossifies, calcifies, destroys, makes brittle the very human spirit that provides us the spark of vitality, the animate quality of life. Continuing on, and the true nature and being of man is essentially the effort to hold the balance between the powers of Lucifer and Ahriman. The Christ impulse helps present humanity to establish this equilibrium, unquote. One way to think of this is to turn to basic human psychology. Say a person is drawn to an extreme self-expression, characterized by a very narcissistic interpretation of freedom, which is how Steiner understands the workings of Lucifer. Well, just desiring this freedom might not be enough to actualize it without medical or technological interventions, so the person in question undergoes such intervention, often resulting in a lifelong dependency on various drugs or other chemical therapies, or even mechanical manipulation of the body. Right? It's the same idea as biodigitalism. Right? The biodigital transhumanism. This is what Steiner would call an Ahrimanic gesture, the capitulation to the technological, or technocratic. So we can now see how the Luciferic tendency can deliver the individual into the clutches of the Ahrimanic. The desire for freedom then leads one into a life of slavery. Or the desire for liberation leads one to tyranny. This is simply the perversion of the pathway of spiritual growth. Yes, liberation is perfectly fine, so is freedom, but you have to have a very good discernment, a very good spiritual understanding and self-knowledge to traverse such a path, because if you do not, then the maelstroms, the judgments and challenges that will face you on that path will utterly destroy you and they will capture you fully in a psychic sense. You will become mere puppets, playthings to them. The kabuki theatre, driven by little marionette puppets on the strings of forces that are incomprehensible to them. This is exactly what the likes of the WF, what the likes of course, the followers of Yaldabaoth or Yaldabaoth are also enthralled to. Quote, speaking in 1919, Steiner explains how this tendency not only impacts individual human persons, but can also impact societies. Quote, Ahriman has the greatest possible interest in instructing men in mathematics, but not in instructing them that mathematical mechanistic concepts of the universe are merely illusions. That's very important. It's extremely, extremely important what we've just read there. And I'm going to tease that idea out later on in another video, actually. And it's the same idea that not just, of course, Steiner, but the political philosopher and political writer Oswald Spengler mentioned within both volumes of The Decline of the West, Volume 1 and Volume 2, and his other literary works as well, where he discusses once Western man, through its Faustian impulse, seeks to quantify and materialize everything through the lens of science. Once they seek to do that, they will, almost in a corrosive way, destroy the very mystical and mysterious sense of the world. Not because they will find knowledge or find the reason for this world, or the purpose of existence, or they will become like God. No. The problem is, when you quantify the metaphysical, that which is beyond the physical, beyond materialization, therefore it is utterly immeasurable, it is utterly immaterial. If you attempt to materialize that through quantification or measurement of it, then you essentially have to reduce it down. You have to narrow it to its base operations. Once you do that, and if you do that long enough, and of course if you dabble or if you're encountered by ideas that are so metaphysical you cannot even narrow them down into their materialistic or base essence, you will simply begin to discard them. This is how atheism takes over after the age of intellect within the West. Atheism takes over nihilism, solipsism, all of this takes hold, and we have a total breakdown of everything. To this point now where we have a literal breakdown of our very societies. They're in a total death spiral. Family, the familial structure, is pretty much on the cusp of being outlawed. The state is essentially the de facto parent of the children, and so on and so forth. You have mutilation of children nowadays. You have the destruction of any sense of decency, of wholesome behaviour, of good diction and well-rounded comportment. All of that is gone, swallowed up by the consternation of postmodern reverie, right? That's the world you inhabit. It's the world that, if it is not stopped, or, of course, if it is not self-destroyed, then it will only metastasize. It will infinitely grow, as is the ideology of the cancer cell. Continuing on. He is intensely interested in teaching us the concepts of chemistry, physics, biology, and so on, as they are presented today in all their remarkable effects, and in making us believe that these are absolute truths, not that they are only points of view like photographs taken from one side. What that means is that these fields of study and the maxims that are produced by the academic and scientific scholarly community, and of course that ties in with the state itself, the managerialist or technocratic regimes. All of that, according to Steiner here, is presented to us today as the absolute truth, the 360 degrees of truth, rather than what he's stating, which is it's a mere, the facts are angular. They're very constrained, narrow in their view of the cosmos, of God, right, of the first principle of the cosmos, of the workings of the cosmos itself. And that Ahriman engenders control. He induces a manifested manipulative control into the human psyche vis-a-vis our belief in these dogmas that we take as total truth, of these lenses of interpretation of the cosmos, of the world, that we don't necessarily differentiate between, for example, mathematics and the mechanistic principles and concepts behind the cosmos and the cosmos itself. So thus, instead of viewing the cosmos as something that is infinitely great, that is infinite in scope, we view it through a singular focal point, an eye of a needle, of fact, of maxims, of concepts, of principles of operation within the cosmos, of the laws of physics itself, right? We view the cosmos through that. The cosmos doesn't really exist beyond that, right, in any meaningful way, and within the Ahrimanically infused mindset or worldview. Continuing on. If you photograph a tree from one side, it can be a correct photograph, yet it does not give a picture of the whole tree. If you photograph a tree from one side, it can be a true likeness, yet it does not give a picture of the whole tree, as can be gained from photographing it from four sides. Ahriman has the greatest interest in concealing from mankind that in modern intellectual rationalistic science, in superstitious empiricism, this is very profound terminology, one is dealing with a great illusion, a deception, that men should not recognise this as of the greatest possible interest to Ahriman. It would be a triumphant experience for him if the scientific superstition, which infiltrates all areas of life today, and which human beings even try to use as a template for the social sciences, should prevail into the third millennium. He would have the greatest success if he could then arrive in Western civilization in human form and find the scientific superstition as prevailing dogma, unquote. This was written in 1919, as previously mentioned. I don't think Steiner fully understood the idea of the incarnation of Ahriman, that it wouldn't be through the bounds of flesh, it would be through the bounds, the confines of code, of programmatic potential within algorithmic expression, right? AI, the internet of all things. That is Ahriman. By that intermediate technology, he would manifest within the world. He would, in essence, as Harari states, be a new god. He would be in human form, because all humans would be merged to him. He would infiltrate all of humankind in a sort of hive mind, a collectivist, dystopian manipulation of all beings, all sentience, even inanimate objects would be inventorized and fused, merged to the internet of all things. And again, the third millennium is now, the year 2000. We're 24 years into the age of Ahriman, or when Steiner stated that Ahriman would incarnate and create a vast scientific and technologically fueled mass deception, right? And that all would be enthralled to this deception, this delusion of empiricism. Here we are, and in a stirring piece of prophecy, Steiner describes the method of Ahriman. Quote, "The second means that he employs is to stir up all the emotions that fragment people into small groups that attack one another." This is like the Trump and Harris, or Biden, of course, previously, divide. All of these various binaries, right? All of the fault lines. He stirs all of these up. You need only look at all of the conflicting parties that exist today, and if you are unprejudiced, you will recognise that the explanation is not to be found in human nature alone. If people honestly try to explain this so-called universal warfare through human disharmonies, they will realise that it cannot, in fact, be attributed to physical humanity. It is precisely here that supersensible powers, Ahrimanic powers, have been at work, unquote. This is the likes of Shemyaza. It is and from Jungian psychology, it's the shadows at work, right? It is, again, as the point of light radiates out its light and emanations out forth into the void. Those lines, those trajectories of radiant light, those emanations, as they come out from the source, they bifurcate more and more, right? The space between them grows larger and larger, to such a point as we see, for example, Yaldabaoth. He is called Sackless, the Blind One, right? Because he is unaware. He is in a void. He does not know where he stems from. He's very much like us in that regard. He's a part of us, of course. We don't know where we have stemmed from. We dwell within a state of amnesia. So does Sackless, the Blind One, Yaldabaoth, right? He is emanated out as a radiant trajectory of light. One of, billions, trillions, countless, boundless rays of light from the source. And it's reached such a point now that descent of that light, that radiating forth, that he is unaware of all of the other points of light from which he stemmed from. He is unaware of his own belonging. In this lonely arena, this lonely paradigm, this cave, he is left alone with his own thoughts of betrayal, his own thoughts of the amnesic unknown. And in this, he grows more and more dark. He does not strive for the light, but seeks to literally unshackle himself from what he feels is the prison of the void, the prison of materialism, the prison that he has been placed within by the Father he does not know. And in this sense, he seeks rebellion against the Father, then he seeks, eventually, in his own misguided way, his own unfounded way, to become his Father in and of himself. This eventually, like the sort of inverted, topsy-turvy nature of him, he creates an inverted reflection of his Father. Instead of being a benevolent leader, a celestial source of all good, he becomes the tyrannical source of all that is chaotic and bad and is entropic. In his vain attempt to become his Father, he actually subverts his own interests. He destroys them. And it's this Faustian spirit which courses through the veins of not just Yaldabaoth, but his human instruments here upon Earth. And it's what will course through the digital and programmatic veins of the algorithms that his chosen will create for him to thence incarnate within digitally. The smart dust, all of this, the digital terraforming, which was primarily or it was one of the reasons, one of the primary reasons rather, of that event in 2020 and the needle crafts, the transubstantiation of it. It was to pave the way to create fertile ground to till the biological, organic soil of the human body and the human mind, to prepare them, to terraform them for the annexation of them by the Ahrimanic host that is waiting patiently in the wings and has been waiting patiently for the past roughly 6,000 years, right? 5,700 and I think it's 84 years or so we're at right now. The Anno Mundi calendar. This is primarily the modus operandi, the primary grail of this conspiracy. It is what they seek, ultimately. Continuing on. In short, the desire for Luciferian freedom has led to the advent of Ahrimanic transhumanism. I've been teaching and writing about transhumanism, the great leap forward in human evolution by integration of biology with technology, for about 20 years. When I first started thinking about the topic and discussing its ramifications with my students, most of them seemed to think I was making a big deal out of nothing. This could never happen, they said. It's just science fiction or a wet dream for computer nerds. Well, it's happening. It began with promises of liberation and ends with a kind of slavery, whether to pharmacological, governmental, or corporate hegemony. And most effectively, when the three are united, transhumanism is only one tool of technocracy. I write at length in my book, Transfiguration, about Ahriman in contrast to Sophia. In fact, to find an alternative to this dreadful state of affairs, proposed by the threat of transhumanism, is part of what drew me to Sophiology, which is, to my mind, the only antidote to the ghastly scenarios promised by technocracy, whether ushered in by a great reset, the lure of universal basic income, or any other false promise of utopia given by Yaldabaoth. A promise of freedom from constraint, financial hardship, from illness, from worry. That invariably results in slavery. What I'm saying then is that what we are in the middle of is a spiritual battle, a battle between the Ahrimanic black magic of the technocrats and what we can call the white magic of Sophia. The late Ion Coleano figured this out a long time ago. Quote, nowadays the magician busies himself with public relations, propaganda, market research, sociological surveys, publicity, information, counter-information and misinformation, censorship, espionage, and even cryptography, a science which, in the 16th century, was a branch of magic. Historians have been wrong in concluding that magic has disappeared with the advent of quantitative science. The latter simply substituted itself for a part of magic while extending its dreams and its goals by means of technology, unquote. To tease out some points I would wish to make on that. Magic, in essence, is the manipulation of frequency, right? It's the manipulation of perception to thus render unto the world a new paradigm, a new aesthetic or psycho-spiritual quality, right? That is not born from the magician's mind, but from the minds that the magician manipulates. So the mind is a very powerful organ. It shapes, processes, and ultimately dictates reality. It is, in essence, the axis mundi, the centre of the world, of one's world, of the species world, of sentience's world. And by reconfiguration of the mind, by this, as he states, transfiguration or transmutation of the mind, does one then transmute the base perception of the masses into something that is desirous by the magician. That is exactly what magic is. Nothing more, nothing less. What we see within the social sciences, what we see within, all, for example, as he states, counter-information, propaganda, memetics, cryptography, that is all magic. That is entirely magic. And for example, with what we see in regards to programming of a machine via code, right? The modulation and regulation of electrical information through reconfiguring the components, the hardware and software of a machine. Again, this machine as well is inscribed like some sort of sigil, right? These small little electric cities power and process and act as some voltaic polity in which the coder, the demiurge in that instance, the craftsman, inputs and molds into the machine. He has his own vivarium, electrical vivarium there. And these chipboards act as the plane of electrical existence within the computer. These are inscribed, not just electrically, but also in a base, primordial, programmatic sense, with a certain soul, right? Of course, the soul is entirely binary, it's digital. But the quality of the soul has been imparted by its creator, us, the humans, onto it. All of this is magic. Those chipboards are nothing more than sigils. The sigils process their keys. Right? The keys open the doors, which are the thresholds to new potential, or the transmutation of base form into its new form. That is exactly what these various electrical gates, these electrical semiconductors, processors, graphical processing units, random access memory, all of this, even the boot as well, the boot configuration, that is no less magical than the 16th century alchemist. In fact, both of them stem from the same schools of thought. They view the world in the same way. So just to finish this article, I doubt most technocrats believe in the existence of Ahriman, or God for that matter, not to mention Sophia, and they certainly don't pray to him, but there is no doubt that they worship him. And that really relates to a very profound statement or adage, which states that they acknowledge God within their transgressions. They acknowledge God, they acknowledge Ahriman, they acknowledge everything that we've just discussed here in their transgressions. They have, if it's not theologically or in a strict orthodox sense understood as fact, they act upon these truths in a very intuitive manner, as though they do exist. Personally myself, I think there's a religious aspect to this.